Well, this video is not so much about the technical details of how to repair an anvil as thinking about how to think about whether or not an anvil should be repaired. So you probably know that I like tools that have the patina of time and use. New paint on an antique tool, or really even a tool that I use every day, is somehow, to me, sort of an ostentation, sort of a attention grab that a tool doesn't need, doesn't want, and certainly doesn't increase its efficiency or utility. So why then grind and polish an anvil? Why weld chips on the edge of an anvil face? Why make that top shine like a mirror and look perhaps something like it looked when it was new? Won't it ruin the temper? Won't it reduce the value? You wouldn't re-blue an antique Colt revolver, would you? Well, no, I certainly wouldn't. If you find an anvil, or you have an anvil, and it's got some chips on the edges or hammer marks in the middle of the face, or maybe some gouges from someone foolishly using a cutting torch right up next to the edge of an anvil, which, by the way, if not a capital offense, certainly is an offense that would justify some corporal punishment. But if you've got an anvil like that, or you find an anvil like that, and you're trying to decide what to do, the first thing you need to determine is, am I collecting this or am I using this? Because if you're using it, maybe that chip or that gouge or that edge being knocked off will be a continual blemish on your forging. If you're going to forge high-end knives, you need a smooth anvil face. If you're doing architectural hardware and you're doing a lot of drawing out, a chip on the fullering edge on the offside of your anvil is going to always be leaving a mark that's later got to be hammered or flattered out or ground out, and it's going to add unnecessary effort to your blacksmithing process. You need to look at the marks and say, are these marks because of use, which in many cases are badges of honor and you wouldn't want to touch, or because of abuse, which is like a stick in your eye every time you look at it and think of someone so irresponsible as to intentionally or ignorantly damage an anvil. And then maybe you've just got chips along the edge of your anvil that are just on there because of use. And as you look at the chips, you can see that the grain growth in that hardened steel face was excessive. The old boys that welded that face on there held it at too high a temperature for too long during the welding process, and the grain growth in there is extreme, and so the edges of that anvil are always going to be chipping off because there's a brittleness and an ineffective temper along that edge. You need to kind of take these things into consideration when you're deciding whether or not you're going to approach your anvil with an arc welder and a grinder. And then the last thing you have to ask yourself is related to the maxim that Clint Eastwood taught so powerfully in his Dirty Harry movies, and that is, a man's just got to know his limitations. Do I know how to do this? Am I going to take a situation that's not great and turn it into a situation that's really awful? And then be honest with yourself? And if the answer is, yep, I can do this, yep, I've learned how, yes, I'm going to be forging on this anvil and it needs to have a smoother face and a smoother fullering edge, yes, it's been abused and I want to obliterate that memory of irresponsibility, then move forward. So anvils tend to crack and chip along the edges just as a function of use. This is a Peter Wright with a hardened face. You can see that it's right on the bubble between whether or not you would want to try to repair this or just use it as a decoration. I think part of the reason that the chipping has been so severe along this edge, the fullering edge, is because of what appears to be a coarse grain structure in that hardened steel face, that high carbon face. When you can see in a break in a piece of carbon steel, the grain of the steel around the size of grains of sugar or larger, the piece was held at too high a temperature for a little too long and it gets coarse. That sort of creates a brittleness and a less than optimum ability to deal with impact. So knowing that Peter Wrights have a reputation for delaminating, that is, the hardened steel face losing its weld between the wrought iron base, this is still intact. I mean, it's deadened by the base, but it still has rebound. So I would think long and hard before I would heat this up and concentrate some heat right here, welding this on. You could put stresses in there that might actually kind of delaminate some of that face. So if this anvil was mine instead of Nate's, and if it was in my shop instead of his, To make this anvil more serviceable, I would probably grind this to a very large radius so that there's a big fullering edge here, and then I would do some smaller repairs over here, take care of some of the most egregious parts of this, and call it good. Put it to work. Grind it a little more, have a pretty nice multi-purpose little anvil in a shop. This anvil, as it turns out, is a family heirloom, revered because of its attachment to Granddad, that is about to be put back into service as a 15-year-old boy and his 40-something-year-old father embark on a blacksmithing hobby together. And there is no better use of an anvil than that.